Good afternoon. Let me invite Dave and Pammy to start their way this direction. Many of you already know them by name. This is Dave and Pammy Crawford. I could tell you a few things about them, but I'm not, because if I do, I'll be throwing out spoilers. What? Oh my goodness. I didn't know that was going up there, so you didn't either? All right, well, I will say this. I've spent a lot of time talking with them about their story, and we've chosen this as a working title. They're here to talk about a miracle of God's grace.
Can you turn that fan on?
I'm already sweating. I know y'all are a family, but my hands are just dripping wet already. And we have a book here. We know the story, but sometimes because there's so many of you guys, we thought there would just be a few. We might get lost. So thank you so much for coming. Thank you for praying for us, but we'll just get started. And I'll tell you that I was born the third of 5 children in October 1954 on a Saturday morning. And even though my mom told me I was the only one they planned for, and my dad was in the delivery room when I entered the world, I grew up neglected and feeling unloved. I needed a lot of attention and affirmation, which I only got in the form of abuse. I started kindergarten when I was 4. My mom was my teacher. I was shy all the way through elementary school, but I did have a few friends, and I learned to trust in their friendship. Growing up, I realized that no matter how good I did in school, even if I got the only perfect score in the whole class, it was never going to be good enough. In 6th grade, I quit trying and just endured school. I took books home in junior high because my mom and dad said I needed to. I spent a lot of time in my room, but I wasn't doing homework. I would read or daydream while my siblings were downstairs playing or watching TV. My room was my safe haven, away from all the criticism, griping, and being told no. When I was a sophomore in high school, I began to rebel. One particular night I came home, and my dad said I was out too late. It was 8 o'clock, and I was supposed to be in bed at 7:30. And he told me if I came home late again, he was going to send me to juvenile detention. So the next night, I came home at 7:35, and he had the policeman standing in the kitchen with my mom and dad. He said to them, "You are making an elephant out of a mosquito," and he took me away. As we walked down the sidewalk, Gunner was like the best policeman in the whole world. We just loved him. But as we walked down the sidewalk, I said to Gunner, "Can my friend Kathy spend the night with me?" He said, "Let's go ask her dad." Well, her dad said she could if she could get a ride to school the next morning. It was 12 miles to juvie, and so she needed to get a ride to school in the morning. She arranged that, and we were off to juvie. The place was filthy. Stained mattresses, no bedding. There was water puddled on the floor. It was cold in there. The roof leaked. We weren't locked in, though. So we went through the unlocked file cabinets, and we found pieces of soap, and we wrote on the cement walls with those bars of soap. We took toilet paper and held our fingers in it. One would do that, the other would flush the industrial strength toilet. I don't know how many rolls of toilet paper we sucked down those toilets, but we had fun. I don't know what time we went to bed on the beddingless beds and slept, but Kathy left in the morning as they were serving me breakfast. My brother came after lunch and walked with me to my dad's car where he was waiting. I made it through that school year, but things were not good between my parents and me. One Friday in September of my junior year, I came home from school and I was told, "You don't live here anymore." Oh, I was devastated. Where am I supposed to go? What am I supposed to do? They were taking me to an uncle and aunt's house 500 miles away. I had serious trust issues with this uncle, and now I have to start a new school and live with him. There was no discussion. I was 15. I didn't do well academically in that high school either, except for choir and band and drama. I made friends quickly, and boys started to take an interest in me. One in particular. We soon became an item. We were in band together. One day, a girlfriend called me and said, "You know, the rumor around your hometown is that you're pregnant." I was blown away. So the next time I talked to my mom, I said, do you know what the rumor is? She said, well, what do you expect when a teenage girl leaves in the middle of the school year? I said, I was not the one who chose to leave. It wasn't very many weeks later that my mom called and told me that my uncle had told her that I wanted to come home. I said, I didn't know. My heart sank, and I put the phone down on the table and said to my aunt, don't you want me either? That was the beginning of a downward spiral for me. I started lying, drinking, not going where I said I was going to go, skipping school. That all became my way of life. Shortly after that conversation, my aunt and uncle moved me to another aunt's house a few blocks away. She had me cook evening meals after school. She trusted me to use her car even after I scraped the side of it on a fence. She had me pay for the repair, but she didn't deny me using her car. She was a good influence in my life and expected the very best from me. I returned home for my senior year and somehow managed to graduate. The day I turned 18, I moved out of my parents' house and moved in with a divorced man who was nearly twice my age. We married soon after and had 3 children. 6 years later, we were divorced. I thought, my mom and dad don't love me. My husband doesn't love me. Who will love me? And now I'm a single mom raising a 1-year-old, a 3-year-old, and a 5-year-old. Each night when I put my children to bed, I drank a bottle of wine. Night after night, that was my routine. One of those nights, I decided to take my life. I was sitting on the edge of a clawfoot bathtub with a knife in my hand, trying to decide, should I stab or should I slice, when my phone rang. It was the wife of my ex-husband's partner in the mine. I didn't know her, I just knew who she was. But she said she felt led to call me to see how I was doing. I told her. She said, would you please wait till I get there? And she told me she was on her way. Her house was 20 miles from mine. Even though my wine bottle was empty and my heart was broken, that phone call from somebody I barely knew gave me a tiny bit of hope. My children were sleeping in their beds. I knew I couldn't leave them. A verse that I had learned as a little girl came to my mind. If you confess your sins, he is faithful and just and will forgive us our sins and cleanse us from all unrighteousness. I walked into my bedroom, knelt by my bed, and recited that verse to God. I told him that I was going to believe that was true, even if I didn't feel any differently after I got up from my knees. I told him I needed him more than I needed my husband and committed my life to him. I was a changed woman by the time Barbara knocked on my door.
I was born the 4th of 8 kids in 1955 in a Mormon family in Moses Lake, Washington. I was the black sheep of the family. I would get beat for whatever was done wrong, regardless of who may have done it. Many times I would get on the school bus in the morning to go to school, all beat up and bloody from the beating. My dad always told me that I was no good and I'd never be any good for anything but lying and stealing. And I think I pretty much lived up to his expectations and all the things he said about me. I figured since my earthly father hated me, my heavenly father must hate me too. I figured he sat up there in a big throne, kicked back, watching a big screen TV and all of his videos, and I was on the videos, and he had a big book, and he would, oh, got you again, there it is. And I didn't think God ever forgave me for any of those things. By the time I was 8 or 9, I realized that I didn't have any hope of ever going to heaven. In 5th grade, I got transferred to a different school. I had a man for a teacher. And I was scared of that man because I thought all men were just like my dad. I thought all those other kids were so much better than me because I couldn't handle being in the same room with this man, and they all seemed to do just fine. Eventually, I was sent down to the principal's office, and they had my mom come and get me. My mom took me to a shrink, a psychiatrist, psychologist, I don't know. It was a man, and the man took me into his office and asked me all these questions. I wouldn't answer him. I was so scared of him. I just looked at my feet and didn't say anything for a half hour or an hour. And finally, he took me out to my mom and said, "I'm sorry, there's nothing I can do for him." So she took me back out to the car. We drove across town out into the country where my grandma and grandpa lived, my mom's parents. And she told my grandma, I can't take him home. I'm afraid his dad will kill him if I take him home. Can he stay here? And Grandpa came in from combining wheat. They lived on a farm. And they said, sure, I can stay there. So after we ate a sandwich, I went out in the field with Grandpa. We started combining, and pretty soon he said, hey, do you think you could do this? Here I am, 9 years old. I said, do what? Think you could? Yeah, I could do that. So he got up, I sat down and steered it. He showed me how to move all the levers. He said, then go over and dump it in the truck. So we drove over there, and man, I couldn't hardly get up and push this lever to get it to empty in the truck. He said, okay, if you can do that, you can do it. I'm gonna go in and take a nap. If something breaks and you hear some noise, just shut it off. Grandma will wake me up. So there I am, having a good time, doing good work, being appreciated for the first time in my life. And I was very grateful. Now I got to figure out where I'm at on this. I stayed with Grandma and Grandpa the rest of that school year and all through the summer. And I didn't know if I was ever going to get to go back home. I didn't know if I was ever going to get to go back to school. I lived with uncertainty, but at least I was happy with Grandma and Grandpa. And every year after that, I went back and stayed with Grandpa and Grandpa in the summertime and would work in the fall harvest and growing. Whenever I was home, I would stay in my room whenever my dad was there. I only came out to get on the school bus or to go to church on Sundays. I didn't even come out for meals because when my dad was home, I wasn't welcome. Sometimes my dad would work out of town and was only home on weekends. He'd leave Sunday night and go to work and come back Friday night. Those were the good times. But one time, I think I was probably in 7th grade, I would mow the lawn every Thursday and get it watered and looking good when he came home. But one time the lawnmower wouldn't start and I didn't mow the lawn. And I heard him yelling at my mom all weekend because I hadn't mowed the lawn. And so the second week when he went to work, she said, I need to come and watch you every night after school, try to start this mower. So she'd come and watch, and I'd try to start it. And by the end of the second week, the lawn was looking pretty bad. And I remember how scared I was sitting in my room listening to him out there yelling at my mom all weekend because I hadn't mowed the lawn. I was grateful when he took off and went to work Sunday night. But when I got off of the bus Monday night coming home from school, I was just filled with terror when I walked up and saw his pickup was in the driveway. He was out there working on the lawnmower, was greasy hands and had a big crescent wrench in his hand. And I walked in the yard and he stood up and said, what's the matter with this mower? I said, I don't know, it won't start. Whack, he hit me right across the chin with that crescent wrench and said, I can see that doesn't start. And started yelling at me. I don't know what else he was saying when he yelled. But when he swung the wrench again, I tried to block it, and the fight was on. He had me in a chokehold and choked me so bad I couldn't see. The lights went out. I knew he was going to kill me. I had to get his arm off, and I hear my neck cracking as I pull my head out, and I still couldn't see anything. I just was flailing my arms, trying to keep him from getting a hold of me again until my vision started coming back, and I ran off screaming down the road to a neighbor's house about a quarter mile away. And I got there and called the police. And the police said, well, why don't you just stay there and spend the night and go to school tomorrow and tomorrow night go home? So that's what I did. But I learned right then that there was nobody ever to help me. If I needed help, I was on my own. I would have to take care of myself. When I would get picked on at school, the fear of the beating I would get when I got home made me cower. But if they started hitting me, all bets were off. I always seemed to just, the fear of the beating I would get there would take over, and I would do whatever I needed to do to survive. A week before my 16th birthday, my dad and I got into another fight. And this time, the first time ever, I fought back. I ended up in a foster home for a year, which changed me a lot for the better. But at the end of that year, I had to go back home. But I had changed so much for the better, I assumed that I could go home and it would be all right. We'd get along and do fine. But I'd only been home for a couple of weeks when he came to my room, my dad, and said, "We're going to have family home evening. Would you care to come and join us?" That's what Mormons do on Monday night. So I said, okay. I didn't dare say no. I got up, went in the living room, sat on the couch. He went into my little sister's room and said, "We're going to have family home evening. Would you care to come and join us?" She said, "No, thank you. I'd just soon not." Boy, he grabbed her by the hair and snatched her off of that bed, and she bounced off of every wall coming into the living room, and he threw her on the couch beside me, and I stood up and said, "I changed my mind. I'm not going to stay here." He said, "You're going to shut up and sit down and listen to what's being said." So I sat down. I said, "It'll go in this ear, it will come out this ear, and I hate you." He said, "If you hate me, then you hate your mother and your brothers and sisters, and you can just leave." I said, "Okay," and I stood up. I said, "But before I go, we're going to finish our dance." And my mom jumped in and handed me some keys and said, "No, no, 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 please, just take my car and go. Just go, just go." So I took her car, I left, and went out and finished the fall harvest, quit high school when I was in the middle of my senior year, finished that harvest, and then I moved off to Portland, Oregon. Got into drinking and drugging. I believed in God, but I didn't think God cared about me. He was watching them videos on TV and keeping track of everything I ever did wrong. And if he was anything like my dad, he was never going to forgive me. So I gave up hope. I made up my own little motto. I told myself, "You know you're going to hell when you die. You better have fun now." And that's how I lived, trying to have fun now. When I was 19 years old, I got into a relationship with this girl, and I figured since we're doing that, we might as well get married. So I married her, bought a house, had a good job. A year later, she's messing around with everybody else and all of my friends, and we divorced. I lost the house. I lost everything. I'm just a loser. I'm a drugger and a drinker and a loser, and I've lived up to everything my dad had said about me. Then I met another gal. And she was a good person, I thought, and we got into a relationship, and after a few years, when I was 24, she broke up with me, and it devastated me so bad that I tried to kill myself. Stuck a gun to my chin and shot. But God put his finger in the way. I figured I'm just a loser. I couldn't even do that right. And somehow my mom found out and called me in the hospital. She didn't know if I was alive or dead. And I told her, and I found out she had divorced my dad by now. And I said, "Can I come home? I need my mommy." So I went home and lived with my mom for about a year. And then I got back together with this girl that I broke up with, and we got married. We had 2 kids. We were married for 4 years. I stayed clean and sober. And then when the girls were 2 and 3, she left me again. Divorced again. I'm a failure. I can't do anything right. I met another woman and got married on the rebound. We were both into drinking and drugs. We bought 20 acres up in a little town called Republic, Washington, a miner's town. But after a year, she divorced me. I was living up to all the things my dad had said about me. I was 30 years old. I'd been divorced 3 times. And I went right back to drinking and drugging and partying.
In 1986, God moved me and my little family to Republic, Washington. The second weekend in June is celebrated with what they call Prospectors' Days. Miners compete, vendors are in the park selling goods, and there's Old West shows going on in the park. One Prospectors weekend, my kids and I were watching a staged gunfight, and I remember being bothered that we were entertaining ourselves. The gunfight ended, and we decided to leave the park. I noticed an ambulance across the street with the lights going, so I ran to the scene because I was an EMT. A crowd had gathered, and there was a man on the ground. CPR was being performed on him, but was stopped long enough to load him on the stretcher and get him in the ambulance. I knew he was gone, a real gunfight, and someone was really dead. I said a prayer for this man's family and for whoever had done this.
In the spring of 1990, road construction was slow getting started because of the rainy weather. I spent a lot of time up in Republic working on my property. And I was at the Prospectors weekend, and I spent the morning in town drinking at the park, spent the evening at the Eagles Lodge drinking at the park. When I left the Eagles, it was dark, it was night, it was cold, cooled off, and I came out and I realized I didn't have my jacket on. So I was driving back up to the park where I'd left it on the picnic table, but I had to go through the alley because the streets were barricaded for the street dance. And I got into the alley and got into a fight. I was arrested and taken to jail. A few hours later, the police came in to the jail cell and said, "Mr. Crawford, we're going to tell you what we're going to charge you with. We're going to charge you with second-degree murder." All of a sudden, time stopped. My world was right in my face. I knew I had been lying to myself all these years when I said, "You know you're going to hell when you die." That was a lie the devil had fed me, and I had believed it, and I had lived by it. And now I've killed somebody. Now I'm really going to hell. Now I see this big igloo, what looks like an igloo, with a big round castle-type doors that open up inward. And I realize the reason they open up inward is because it's a vacuum in there, and there's flames and fire all on the floor, and the devil is standing there going, "Ha, ha, 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 gotcha!" And I lunged on that cop, threw my arms around him, and I hooked on his bulletproof vest on both sides, and I'm screaming, "No, no, no," because my legs, I feel like they're flailing in the wind as I'm being sucked into hell with this devil, and I'm screaming, "No, no, no." Then all of a sudden, time started back up. The cops were no longer in the room. I don't know when they left. I don't know how they got me off of that cop. I don't know anything. I don't know how long they've been gone or how long they were there. But I'm standing there all by myself, knowing that I'm going to hell, and I've been believing a lie. I spent a very miserable night that night, calling out to a God I didn't know, begging for forgiveness, saying I'm sorry. The next morning, a jailer lady came and knocked on my cell door. And she said, "David, there's a minister here to talk to you. Would you like to talk to him?" The old Dave Crawford would have said, "No, I don't need no preacher. I got myself in here. I'll get myself out. Kill that preacher to kick rocks." But before I could let those words fall out of my mouth, I'm remembering where I'm at and why I'm here. And I need God. And I said, "Yes, tell that preacher I'll talk to him." She said, "I'm going to go get him and put him in a room, and I'll be right back." So she left. I got up off the bunk, and I washed my face, trying to get all the crying off, which wouldn't come off. Then she came back to get me and walked me down the hallway to this room. As I walked down there, my head was just hanging. I was just covered with shame and so miserable. And I walked down there, no hope. And she opened up the door to this room, and I see this big old man sitting at this table with his fingers crossed on the table like that. And he looked at me, and I remember thinking, the kind of life I lived, you always thought like this. This guy would have been somebody to tangle with in his day. I wouldn't have wanted to meet him at night. And then he spoke with this soft voice and a kind eyes, and he said, "Hello, David. How are you doing?" I said, "I'm going to hell. That's how I'm doing." He said, "Oh, God will forgive you." I said, "I killed somebody. I can't just say, 'Here's your life back. I'm sorry. Please forgive me.'" He said, "Oh, that's what Jesus died for." I said, "What?" And he explained to me for the first time how Jesus had paid for my sins. I had heard about Jesus dying on a cross. I had heard about all that, but it never made sense to me until now. And Bob looked at me and he said, "Would you like to accept this Jesus?" And I grabbed him by the arm and I said, "Yeah, if it'll work." Nearly ripped his arm out. And he prayed for me with tears running down his face. And I sat there asking Jesus into my heart to forgive me, crying buckets of tears. And when I left that room and walked back down to my cell, my head was held up. I wasn't proud. There was no pride, but there was I was not hopeless anymore. I was filled with hope. I went back there, and I hadn't been there very many days, a couple of days, when I got a letter from a lady I didn't know. Her name was Phyllis. Phyllis wrote me this card, and she said, "I don't know what God is doing, but I know his word never fails." And she quoted Romans 8:28. And we know that in all things, God works together for those who love him, who've been called according to his purpose. And I read that and just held that card to my heart and cried. Phyllis wrote me many, many encouraging notes. She would type up little things from our daily bread, which I didn't even know what the daily bread was, and mail them into me, and I would read them. She would come and visit me, and she just discipled me. She had a Bible sent to me. And let's see where I'm at. I hadn't been in the jail there but about 2 months from the day they had charged me with second-degree murder, when I was convicted of first-degree murder. But that's a whole nother story. Phyllis's encouragement worked wonders to me. She came in and told me, she came to visit many times, and she said, "David, they're going to take you in for sentencing in 30 days from your conviction. But when they sentence you, they're not going to bring you back to your cell. They're going to just take you off to Spokane. So I want you to call me the night before you go in for sentencing." I said, "All right." So I called her up the night before I was going to be sentenced, and she said, "David, there's someone here that wants to talk to you," and handed the phone to this little girl. And this little girl said, "Hi, Dave, I love you. I'm praying for you." I said, "Who's this?" She said, "My name is Heidi, and there's somebody else that wants to talk to you." And she handed the phone off to somebody else. And there must have been 12 or 15 kids that got on the phone and said, "Hi, Dave, I love you. I'm praying for you." And then Phyllis got back on the phone. Turns out Phyllis was a youth group leader. And this was the night the youth group would meet at her house and do Bible studies, and they would pray for me. So off to prison I went. Phyllis told me to call her every week. She said, "I want you to stay in touch with me. I don't want to lose touch with you. Call me every week." And so I did. I would call her every week, and we would talk about things, and she would send me stamps so I could write. One day, Phyllis said, "Heidi is sick in the hospital. Would you send her a get well card?" I said, "Sure." So I go to the chapel. I get a get well card. They have lots of cards. You get them for free. Phyllis would send me stamps, so I got stamps. I got a nice get well card, and I took it back to my cell, and I got ready to sign it. And God told me, "Don't send her a get well card. She's not going to get well." I had never heard God speak to me before. Maybe I didn't hear him here, but I knew what he said. I knew Heidi was not going to get well, and I didn't know what to do. So I didn't send the card. I went back the next day and called Phyllis again and asked her about Heidi. She said, oh, Heidi will be fine. You go ahead and send a get well card. And I said, well, this is what I think God is saying. And she said, no, I'll be fine. You go ahead. She's been sick a lot. So I went back to my cell, got ready to sign that card, and God said, I told you not to send her a get well card. She is not going to get well. I had just been reading in the Bible where people know what God wants, but they go listen to other people who tell them whatever their itching ears want to hear. And I sat on my bunk and cried because that's what I had just done. I had just put God aside to go listen to what I wanted to hear. The next day I went back to the chapel. I got a generic little card, and I wrote on this card a little encouraging note to Heidi, and I told her Jesus loved her, and I quoted some of John 14 to her, and I mailed it off. And a week later I heard, when I called Phyllis, she said, oh, Heidi got your card, and she liked it. So I kept them cards going. I mailed her cards, sometimes 2 a week. And just to encourage her, I would have the guys in the Bible study at church sign it. I would mail these cards every week. And then one day, I got called into the chaplain's office. He said, do you know a girl named Heidi? He couldn't pronounce the last name, so I pronounced it. And I said, did she die? He said, oh, did someone tell you? I said, no, I just knew.
Heidi moved to heaven October 25th, and 2 months later, God moved me from Republic, Washington to Yakima. Phyllis called me one day and said, hey, I'm going to go. No, Phyllis called me one day. She didn't say what I was going to say. She said this. Would you like to write to the guy who encouraged your daughter? I said, sure, I can do that, but he needs to write to me first. He wrote, and we began corresponding regularly. 5 months later, Phyllis said she was going to visit David on August 29th. Would I like to go with her? I already had a commitment that weekend, and so I told her no, but I sensed God was telling me I needed to go. So I said, I'll pray about it, and I'll call you back in a couple of days. I hung up the phone, and I said to God, I already have a commitment that week. And I don't know very many people at this church. I haven't been going there very long, and it's a big church. And if you want me to go with Phyllis, then somebody needs to go in my place and pay me, because that's just how it is. I didn't know how that was going to happen, but Sunday night after church, a gal came up to me and said, could I go to the seminar in your place? Sure. Gave me a check, and I said to God, okay, I'll go meet this man. I was pretty nervous going into the prison. Guards were gruff, and they made it real clear. You need to know this, that we're in charge. We got in the visiting room, and I checked David over pretty good. Man, was he handsome. Deep-set blue eyes, beautiful hands. His clothes were clean. He wasn't all tattooed like I thought all prisoners were. Not very far into the visit, I said to David, could I ask you a few personal questions? He agreed, so I said to him, what's it feel like to be a murderer? His eyes filled with tears that spilled down his cheeks, and he said to me how sorry he was and how he would have to live with that for the rest of his life. But he had defended himself, and even though he was convicted, he was not a murderer. I then asked him, so, if God lets you out of prison tomorrow, how do you know that you won't go back to the same life you were living before you got here? He told me of the experience he had when the policeman came and told him what they were going to charge him with in the county jail. And he said, if I want that back, I'll go back to that life. Okay, so, God's just your crutch then? Yes, ma'am, till the day I die. I knew before the 2.5-hour visit was over that God had chosen this man to be my husband. I don't think so. And I told Phyllis that very thing as we left the prison to walk to our cars. Got in my car, shut the door. I said, there is no way I would ever marry a man in prison. Do you hear me, God?
I had told God that I needed someone. I'd even given him a list of qualifications that I had for a woman. Leaving the visiting room that first day, I asked God, is this the woman you've picked for me?
I didn't know David was feeling the same leading from God that I was because we never talked about it. But I talked to God about it for 8 months. Reasons why I shouldn't and couldn't marry a man in prison. God always had a response. I said, he's killed a man. If you're guilty of one sin, you're guilty of them all. But what will people think? You want to please them or you want to please me? I don't want to be an inmate wife. But maybe Jesus didn't want to become one of us either. The intent of our heart was evil continually, all the time. But he did. And who better to understand these inmate wives than one of them? I visited David a few more times, and then I told God, thank you, David. I visited David a few more times, and then I told God, I cannot afford to keep driving the 3 hours to Walla Walla and 3 hours back. I can't do that anymore. My intended last visit, that very day, a lady chased me to my car. I didn't even know this woman, and she said, this is quite a ministry to these men. I said, this isn't a ministry. I'm falling in love with him. She said, doesn't matter. God told me to tell you, anytime you need money to come down here to visit, you ask me. And she put $10 in my hand. I'd been presenting my case to God, and I felt like I was losing. So I'm going to go talk to my pastor. I told him I was falling in love with a man in prison and how I believed God was calling me to be this man's wife. Pastor Larry asked me, what did he do? So I told him. Not very nicely either. There wasn't any judgment from Pastor Larry at all, but he said to me, you can murder a man with your tongue. So now what am I going to do? I'll talk to my parents. They don't like anybody. They'll be my trump card. I called my mom, and I told her I'd met a man. She asked me if he was a Christian. Yes. Does he have a job? He was sweeping up cigarette butts in the prison for 35 cents an hour, so I could say, yes. Then she said, does he have a vehicle? He had a Datsun pickup that somebody was keeping for him while he was away. So I could reply to her, yes, he has a pickup. Then she asked me, is he in prison? I replied, yes, Mom, he is. She said, well, I can't argue with God, and gave her blessing. She was my out. I'm going to talk to my sons. So they went with me to meet David, and they liked him. But I continued to resist God's leading. I wanted to have a man that I could be with, somebody I could go to church with, somebody I could go to the movies with, go to dinner, share a home. I didn't want to be a single woman who was married because I'm not available. I put my head in my hands and cried. God, David is a fine man, but please get him out of prison first. Please, God.
Pammy kept coming to visit. Our visits were so good, everybody in the visiting room knew we had something special. Staff and inmates alike, and the other visitors. I didn't really know why she kept coming. I certainly had nothing to offer her, but I knew it was a God thing. So one day I worked up the courage, and I asked her what she would say if I asked her to marry me. She said flatly, don't ask. So I shut up. I didn't want to lose what we had. I figured she would just quit coming. I didn't know until later that God had been telling her I was the man for her, and if I asked her, she would have to say yes in obedience to God.
In April, 8 months after we met, David and I began to discuss marriage. We were both afraid, but we prayed and we told God we believed that he was calling us to be husband and wife. But we told him we didn't know when we were supposed to do this. We'd wait for his leading. When I got home from visit that day, I wrote to David and I said, not before December 1st. When he got back to his cell, he wrote to me and said, I don't think we should get married before December 1st. Our letters crossed in the mail. The date was set. In September, I went again to see my pastor. My mom went with me, and even though I was still embarrassed to be marrying a man in prison, I asked Pastor Larry if he would perform the ceremony. He was honored and put it on his calendar. Then he told me he was heading to Jerusalem in a few days, and he would write to David from there and tell him the same. The day before the wedding, Phyllis called. She told me that she had called Pastor Larry because she had all kinds of red flags about David and me. I was so excited, but I tried not to let on. I just thought, maybe I don't have to marry him. Maybe I just have to be willing, like Abraham. So as soon as we hung up, I thanked her for calling, and then I called Pastor Larry. I said, Phyllis called me to tell me she had called you to tell you that she had all kinds of red flags about us, David and me. Are you having doubts, Larry? He said, yes. And the hurrah in my heart was just short-lived because he continued on and said, but I'm going on yours and Dave's faith. Oh. Then he said, I told Phyllis I am compelled by God to perform this ceremony. Okay, see you tomorrow. I love David, but not enough to marry him in prison. I chose to marry him out of obedience to God, my first love. So, we're going to the chapel.
The day of the wedding finally came, and I wasn't sure Pammy would show up at all. I sat in my cell, I was ready, I was waiting, and finally they called me and told me to head to the chapel, so I knew she was there. When I got to the chapel, she wasn't at the chapel yet, and I waited. We went in when she got there, and they locked the door behind us, posted an armed guard outside the door. A friend sang, I surrender all. The volunteer chaplain in the back kept saying, amen, praise God.
As I stood there, I asked myself, what in the world are you doing? I answered myself, I'm marrying the man God chose for me. Pastor Larry asked David, do you take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife? Yes, sir, I do. David took my hands and repeated his vows to me. As I began to say my vows, God's love poured over me and filled my heart with unconditional love for David. Pastor Larry told me later he had never heard a bride say her vows with such conviction.
We had a most wonderful wedding for the few minutes that we had. We said our vows, we shared communion, we signed the marriage licenses, and then I went back to my prison cell for 16 more years.
David's best man, who was his cellie, walked back into the prison with David. I left the prison with the wedding party. My sons, my mom, my best friend, the pastor, and we headed to a local church where a friend had arranged a wedding reception for us. All of us, except the groom, enjoyed sandwiches and punch and mints. Pastor Larry drove me to the courthouse before visit after the reception so we could certify the marriage license. As we drove, I said to Pastor Larry, are you still having doubts? He said, no. David is an anointed man, and I am so glad I get to be a part of this. After visiting that evening, we drove the 3 hours back home.
I spent the first 3.5 years of my prison sentence at the Washington State Penitentiary in Walla Walla. I spent the next 3.5 years at Column Bay Correction Center, and the last 12 years of my sentence at Airway Heights Correction Center. And then I was released about 8 years early for good behavior on May 27th, 2009.
Before David was released, I asked him if he would be willing to have breakfast with a few friends before we headed to Ephrata. He strongly objected. He wanted to get out of Dodge. I reminded him of the people who came to visit him, the people who prayed for him while he was in prison, and it's not all about you. He He wanted to know how many people we'd have breakfast with. I said, I don't know, 6, 7, dozen. So he agreed. The restaurant opened the banquet room for us because there were 60 people that attended that breakfast. What a celebration.
When a man gets out of prison after spending that much time, he feels like he's carrying this big sign, says, hey, everybody, look at me, I just got out of prison. You don't see it, but we feel it. And I carried it into that restaurant, and Pammy introduced me to all of these people, and I left that sign there. I didn't carry it out when I left.
David was focused on work and had very little time for us when he got out of prison. One evening, he was not home at his regular time, so I called him several times, and he did not answer his phone. And I thought, is he laying in the dirt somewhere? Did he have another heart attack? I waited another hour, and I thought, I'm going to go across the highway to the shop to see if anyone's there who knows where David might be. I pulled into the parking lot, and my concern for him immediately turned to irritation. He was sitting on a street sweeper, tootling around the parking lot in a cloud of dust. I turned around to leave, and he whistled at me. Where are you going? Home, where you should have been an hour ago. He said, I'll be right there, and he was. At dinner that evening, we talked about setting a time aside for us the next evening for a date. Nothing special, a swim in the pool, just a walk, just to be together. I was doing breakfast dishes the next morning, and I began to talk to God about how I was feeling when David didn't come home last night. I don't know what I'd do if I lost him, I told God. And God reminded me that David had just been released for ministry. That's another story too, we'll tell you one day. And I said, but look what happened to your son when he was released for ministry. God's reply was that I needed to trust him with David. I submitted and committed to do just that, and then I went about with my day. At 4 o'clock, David called me, and he said he had a little job with the street sweeper, cleaning the driveway for his boss. He thought he'd be done around 5 o'clock, but if I'm not, I will call you. 5:15 came without a call, but I wasn't concerned. I thought maybe he's chatting with his boss or something. I got the last touches done on dinner and sat down on the couch. 5:30, still no call, but I still was not concerned. At 5:40, I got a call from David's boss's wife. She asked me what I was doing. I said, I'm just sitting here waiting for my sweet David to come home. She told me he's not coming home and began to tell me that he'd been in an accident and was in the ER at the local hospital. I didn't even know how to get there, so she told me as I dashed out the door. On my way to the hospital, I called my brother in Idaho, some friends in Washington. I left a voice message on a church where we had attended a couple times. And then I called the local Ephrata church where we were attending currently. I had no details about his injuries. I just asked them to pray. I made my way through the hospital staff and assessed David as I walked into the ER. He was naked and immobilized on a backboard. He had abrasions from his head to his ankles. He had good boots on. A nasal cannula was delivering oxygen to him. A C-collar was on his neck, and his head was strapped to the board. His scalp laid on the sheet beneath him. I could see his fingers moving, and he was talking some, even though he was disoriented. I spoke his name. He recognized me as I bent down and kissed him. His breath was hot and shallow. Nurses and doctors kept telling me not to get my hopes up and kept giving me form after form to sign. I could see the grave concern on their faces, and I could hear the words they were speaking, but it wasn't getting into my head. Had no effect on me. The peace I had was from the assurance that God causes all things to work together for the good of those who love him and are called according to his purpose. Soon Life Flight arrived to transport David to Spokane. I asked the attendants to please keep telling David that Pammy loves you. Pammy loves you. And when you deliver him to the trauma unit, would you please call me? They said they would do that, but they did not think he would survive the 30-minute flight to Spokane. I was 40 minutes from Spokane when Life Flight called and said, we have successfully delivered your husband to the trauma unit, and he is still with us. I stayed with David in the trauma unit, in the ICU, and after he was transferred to rehab. His injuries included a broken neck, broken ribs, broken back, a pneumothorax, and serious head trauma. He was in and out of consciousness, and when he would wake up, he would say things like, "God is showing me what a prideful man I am," and he'd be back out. Or, "Jesus is showing me what a servant he is. When I choose to do what I want, I can just run right over him." Then he'd be out again. Jesus and David were having some serious conversations, and I felt like I was missing out.
I don't remember anything about the accident, only what I've been told. What I do remember is that it was a hot summer day when I had the accident, and my next memory is walking down the street holding hands with my precious wife in the wintertime. Prison was a cakewalk compared to living with a brain injury. A brain injury made me become a different person, changed the way food tastes, lost all my memories. Pammy's had to learn to love a whole new man, and sometimes I don't even like him.
Yes, prison was a cakewalk compared to the effects of a brain injury. David finished 8.5 years, long years, of therapy in 2018, and we went on a new adventure with God. I do want to add, before my dad died, I was able to forgive him. I know he did his best. Besides that, I really made it difficult for him. He forgave me too. My mom lived with David and me for 3 years before she wanted to move into assisted living. Because of the time we got to spend with her, we were able to forgive each other also. The last 6 years of my life, of her life, I had the relationship with my mom that I always wanted. I still miss her.
We've made plans over the past few months, but a lot of them have been changed. We've launched our boat, we've hoisted the sails, and we will go wherever God causes the wind to blow.
Amen. The end. I need my glasses. Would you grab our water, please?